Hello, everyone. This is the second daf now, daf Ayin Dalid, Amid Aleph, or daf Ayin Dalid, I guess, in Masechet Avodah Zarah, very close to the end. Recording this ahead of time from Jerusalem. And we are up to the first word on the line. So it says the Mishnah, daf Ayin Dalid, Amid Aleph, continuation, right? We've been discussing actually till now where mixtures go together, a little bit of wine with a different amount of wine, or water with water, or milk with wine, or soup, or things like that. But now we talk about things that are mixed, that are distinct, right? They have their own identity. We call that davar shebiminyan, something that you would sell by saying, I want 5 grapes or 3 barrels. And then you have 1 barrel that mixes with other barrels or things like that, or pieces or almonds with other almonds or things like that. So it says our Mishnah, Ela Asurin, the following things are prohibited, Asur Bahana'a, and any amount of them that mixes with something else, even if it's a small amount and something bigger, Osrin B'Kolshu, they will asr even with a small amount. Yain Nesach, wine, Yain Nesach, and again, like I said, it's not the wine itself, it's like a barrel of wine, let's say, or Avodah Zarah, an object that's Avodah Zarah, something that was itself worshipped. So let's say, you have a bunch of wooden statues and people bow down to one of them and then it mixes up, you don't know which one. And orot levuvim, we had this way back in the beginning of the Masechta. Orot levuvim are these hides of animals where you find the heart was torn out. Remember, there had to be some blood there, but it was used in the worship of Avodah Zarah. And Shar Niskal, if you have an animal that was condemned to be slaughtered because it killed someone, right? Or it killed several sharot, depending on the case. That animal is supposed to be killed. It runs away, and now it's mixed among 10, 50, or 100 other animals. The egla rufa, right? You have an egla that was dedicated for the one to have its neck broken because of a person who died. And then again, the egla got mixed among other agalim. Or tzipore mitzora, you have the birds of a mitzora, or se'ar nazir, the hair that's cut off from a nazir. Petr chamor, remember you would exchange the chamor for another animal, and that animal would be used, would be sacrificed. Basar b'chalav, if you have a mixture of milk and meat. Sa'ir ha'mishtalech shiyom kippurim. This could imagine this kind of scandal. They took out the sa'ir mishtalech, and then they're walking out and they got lost, so they don't, now it's mixed among other se'irim. V'chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, where you have a piece of meat that was chulin, that was slaughtered in the Beit HaMikdash, which you're not allowed to use, and then of course it got mixed up in the butcher shop. Hareilo asurim v'oshrim mikol. These asur, and any mixture of this, anything else would become asur. That is our mission. Now says the Gemara, it's a very curious case in our list of cases in our mission. Well, what's the point of the Tana? Why are we giving this list? Tana Maika Chashiv. What is the Tana? What's the criteria that we're using to describe things in our Mishnah? Okay, so one thing is that these are things that you count as units. You count a cow, you count a idol, right? You count an object, you count things. So, and therefore they're not batel. But then litrinami chatichot nivela. So just come up with a very simple case. You walk into a butcher store and there's 20 steaks sitting there, and one of them is nevela, and 19 are not, you don't know which one it is. So that's a davar shebeminyan, right? Things that you sell by unit, and one of them gets mixed in, and should aser all of them. Says Gemara, so that's not clear if that's the case in our Mishnah, if we're trying to mention davar shebeminyan or there's some other criteria. Now, something else about our Mishnah that's very interesting is that everything we mentioned in our Mishnah is asur b'hana'ah, right? So maybe that's the point. The reason they're not batel is not just because it's davar shebeminyan, it's because you can't get hana from it. So then, but there are other things that don't get hana. Litni nami chametz b'pesach, right? We all know very famously the chametz b'pesach is asur b'hana. So say that same thing you true by chametz b'pesach. If you buy, 20 bags of Doritos, which I just bought this morning, and one of them is chametz, and 19 are not, you don't know which one is which, then the Doritos should not be batel. It's both. Our Tana holds you have to have both. This is Rashi's understanding. You have to have both things. You have to have davar shebeminyan. V'surei has to be something which you sell as a unit, essentially on its own, meaning it's its own distinct and notable thing. And it also has to be isur hana. So really, you need both things in order for it to become not batel. Says, okay, what about other cases? Litnia goze perach, Rimoni badan. If you recall, these are all things we quoted in the Mishnah and Trumot, right? That are chashav. These are objects that are basically very unique. To Rimoni, goze perach means this kind of perach nuts. Gozim sounds like almonds, but it means some kind of nut that's very valuable. That people really, you don't sell, a bushel of them or a bundle of them. You sell each one individually. or rimone badan. These are special pomegranates that come from badan. Again, same thing. They're very significant. They're heirloom tomatoes, right? So these are davar shebeminyan, and they're asurei hana if they are orla, meaning if they're grown in the first 3 years. And so they should also not become batel. Says Gemara, you're right. That's not leihatzam. There's another Mishnah in Masechet Orla which actually mentions those things. Because the Mishnah quote, now we're quoting the Mishnah, Hara'oila Arla, we give a list of things that are chashev, and then we say those that are Ra'oi for Arla are puzzle for Arla. Ra'oi the Kilei HaKerem, things that are klai, remember, that are mixed up in the vineyard where you have grapes growing with grain, that is their klai HaKerem. Says the okay, I have another question. So let's talk about chametz b'Pesach. Now you're going to say chametz b'Pesach we don't mention because although it's isur hana'ah, right, it is not a davar shebeminyan. You don't sell chametz by the unit of chametz. You sell a bag of flour. You sell things like that. But there are things that you do sell. Kikarot shel ba'al bayit are these very fancy cakes or chalot that are made by a homeowner, by a baal bayit. They're made in an artisanal way. And there you would sell them by unit, right? You'd sell them by 5 pieces or 3 pieces or something like that. So it's a davar shebeminyan and it's asur b'hana because it's chametz. Says Mar, you're right. Man shamet le damar le. Who's the person who says, we have the whole gersa here, right? Man shamet le, where am I? Who's the one who says, right, on the side, you can see there's this chain, I have at least on my side. Man shamet to amar chametz v'pesach asur b'hana, which would make sense. Who says the chametz v'pesach is asur b'hana? That's Rabbi Akiva. That's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And Hatana lehatam, actually the Mishnah there in Orla adds Mosif. Rabbi Akiva, Mosif, af kikarot shabal bayit. Rabbi Akiva adds kikarot shabal bayit. So in fact, we do say those again. We don't say them here. We say it there, which is, I guess, a complementary Mishnah. And in fact, kikarot shabal bayit are also included. Harei elo. Now the Mishnah continued and said, these are asur and aser b'kol shuv. That's what you said in the beginning of the Mishnah. What are you adding? Lamute mai. What do you exclude? Harei elo means these are asur. What's not? So it says somewhere, well, it depends. It's excluding something that is counted, so it's notable, but it's not asur b'hana. And inam lemuti isur hana davar shebeminyan, or maybe the opposite, to exclude something that's asur b'hana, but is not something that is davar shebeminyan. So therefore, in those cases, it's not enough to be to passel everything. There would be this is how Rashi understands it. There would be a lesser share of bitul. We don't exactly know what it is, but it's not a kol show. Maybe it's notein tam, but it's definitely not a kol show. Okay, so that is the first case, the first Mishnah for today. The second Mishnah, we are now closer to the bottom of Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, is Yayin Nesech Shenafal Labor. We had this case many, many times before. Not many, but we had it sometimes before. Yayin Nesech that fell into a pit, right, where the bar is full of wine that is not Yayin Nesech. A little bit of Yayin Nesech falls into that bar. Says the Mishnah, Kulo Asur Bahana. They're all Asur Bahana. Now we're going to see the case in a little bit. But let me read. Let's read inside and we'll see what we're talking about. The whole thing is Asur Bahana. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, what's the big deal? Yimacher Kulo Legoy. You go to a non-Jew and say, look, I have a vat of wine to sell you. There's a little bit of yain nesach inside of it. So chutz midmei yain nesach shebo. So pay me for the vat, except for the amount of yain nesach. I can't get hana from the yain nesach, but if it's 1 liter of yain nesach and 900 liters of kosher wine, I could sell it to you, and you'll deduct a tiny bit from the price because I can't get hana from it. That's what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says. Now, I'm a Rav. Says Rav. Let me just clarify for you. Halacha ki Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, but only for talking about chavit b'chavit. If you're talking about one barrel that fell into other barrels, meaning I have a big warehouse of wine, I have 1,000 barrels in my warehouse. One of them is yain nesach. By mistake, the delivery guy dropped off the wrong barrel and it got mixed in. So then the wine of the yain nesach is never mixed with the wine in the other barrels. So I can go to someone and say, I'll sell you all 1,000 barrels. Pay me for 999 of them. And that's what we pass like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Avalo yain b'yain. But if the wine itself became mixed, meaning it was a big container of wine, and you poured a small amount of wine into it, you can't then sell that whole vat of wine and say, except for the value of one bit of yain nesach, because the yain nesach mixes with the other yain and makes it all puzzle. Shmuel says, I disagree. I feel a yain b'yain. Halacha would be, according to Shimon Gamliel, even if you mix wine with wine, you could sell it, except for the value of that small amount. Excuse me 1 second. So that, sorry, is Rabbi Yochanan's, Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Chanan, Rabbi Yochanan. The Chain Amar Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Reb Chanina. In fact, Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani said, "Afil yayin b'yayin." The same thing would be true about yayin b'yayin. The Chain Amar Reb Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avu Afil yayin b'yayin. So you have a lot of opinions of yayin b'yayin. Says Reb Nachman. Let me tell you the bottom line. Right, we are 3 lines from the bottom now, 2 lines from the bottom. Halacha l'maaseh. Let me give you the practical halacha. Yayin nesach, yayin b'yayin asur. You want to know something? If it's yayin nesach and you mix one bit of wine into a large bit of wine, it asurs the whole thing. You can't go and sell that vat of wine and say, "Oh, I'm only selling the part that's regular yayin." It's all mixed. It's all yayin nesach. Halacha. Chavit b'chavit, but if it's a barrel with mixed with another barrel, then it's mutar. Again, except for the value of that one barrel, that's yayin nesach. And stam yayin, but if it's not yayin nesach, but it's stam yayin, which of course we learned is like Zarah because of yayin nesach or because of tarova, all the reasons, then I feel yayin b'yayin mutar. Then even if it's one bit of wine or one jug of wine fell into a whole vat of wine, you can sell the whole thing, except you'd have to take out the value of the small amount that would be yayin stam. So that's how we paskin, and that's what Rav Nachman says. Okay, very straightforward. Turn the page to Daf Ayin Dalet on the bet, where it's about to get nice and complicated. Says the Mishnah. The next case, and we discussed this, remember, earlier, the whole process of how you clean things out, right? Remember, we had different ways. You can wash it out, you can dry it, you can use things to dry it out, you can leave it for a few days. Anyways, says our Mishnah today on Daf Ayin Dalet Amabet, Gat Shel Evan. You have a gat. A gat is like a big wine press where they, would store and would crush grapes and store wine as well. And basically, you were zafta, right? Remember, zafta is where you pour zephet, pour like tar into it to line it, to waterproof it, like they did with the teva of Moshe, right? So let's say an ovei kuchavim is mizafta, okay? Now that's fine. We don't really care if a non-Jew puts tar into your wine. The problem is that they also, we'll see in the Gemara, put some wine in when they're doing that process. And if they put wine in and it's yain nesach, then mixed in with that tar, with that pitch, is yain nesach. So that lining usually contains some wine in it as well, right? So says the Mishnah, you can be minagva. All you have to do is minagva, which means to clean it out. We talked about this cleaning out earlier. We'll discuss it some more. The heat tahora, and the whole vat will become tahor. Bishal eitz, but if it's made out of wood, so wood, of course, absorbs more. Then Rebbe says still doesn't matter, Yinagiv. You could just do the niguv that we said in the beginning. And the Chachamim say, no, Yiklof et hazefet. You'd actually have to peel off the tar that the non-Jew put in, because contained within that is some yain nesach. The shel cheres. Now, if it's made out of cheres, remember, cheres is always the hardest thing to purify. The Torah says you can't kasher cheres. Then says the Mishnah, apisha kalaf et hazefet. Even if you peel off the tar that you lined it with, harezu asura, that would be asur, because there's no way to kasher that. Okay. So again, that's how we understand it. As I explained, this zephet, this tar that was put in the inside to waterproof, was made not just with tar, but it had a little wine included in it, and because of that, it's asur bahana. Now, Amar Rava. Now says Rava, dafka zifta. That the whole Mishnah is talking about zifta. Sorry, I'm going to move for 1 second. Please excuse me. Pause 1 second. Sorry, we're back. Dafka zifta. It's only true. Sorry, we're on Ayin Dalet bet right after the Mishnah. Rava says it's only true that you can basically you have to do niguv if the non-Jew lined it with zephet. Avodah balo. But if the non-Jew just sort of, darach means you step on it, right? Where he steps on the grapes in the vat, lo, that's not a problem, right? Because you're not worried about anything then. So pshita, obviously, Zaftat Mishnah said if the non-Jew put the tar inside of it. Says I might have thought who I did not feel darachba, that the same thing would be true if the non-Jew actually used the vat. He crushed grapes in it. Hiding zafta. The reason the Mishnah said zafta is because orcha de milta katani. That's generally the way you did it. Kamashmona, that's not the case. That even sorry, it's only the case where he put the tar in it. But if he sort of was just darachba, right, without lining it, then you don't have to worry about the non-Jew using your vat. Now some said I'm a Rava dafka zafta. What Rava said was, in fact, it's only if the non-Jew was the one who lined your thing with tar. Avodah, but if you lent your vat to a non-Jew to work in, it's not enough to actually clean it out because you have to worry that he actually not only used it for yain nesach, but that it got soaked into it. That if you wash it out, it won't be enough. Pshita. So okay, that also seems to be obvious because our mission just said zaftat's not. This I would have thought the opposite. Who I did not feel that it's true that you can wash it out even if a non-Jew uses your press. Hi diktani zafta. The reason the Mishnah said only zafta is orcha de It's usually where you give it to a non-Jew to line it for you because they're experts in that, but you don't give it to them to use it. Kamashmalan that dafka zafta. It's only if the non-Jew was the one who did the zefet, who put the lining in avodarachba. But if he used it for presumably for grapes, then you have to. Avodarachba lo sagila beniguf. It's not enough to do niguf. You have to actually peel off the lining. Rashi explains sort of that the case here is where you basically lined your vat, right? And then if a non-Jew worked in it, you have to assume he used yain nesach. The question is, does the yain nesach get absorbed into the vat? Is the tar lining a waterproof lining or not? So if it is waterproof, then the fact that he used your vat for avodah for yain nesach doesn't matter because you just wash it out and things are good. But if things get absorbed into the tar, then you basically would have to actually peel off the tar and you'd have to reline it or reseal it before a Jew could use it. So that's the question. Now, in fact, there was a case Yahuda to the Kamed Rabbi Chia. There was a case that a person came in front of Rabbi Chia. Amaleni said, "Havli gavra the midaki li matzartai." Give me a person, meaning I want your hashgacha, right? I want you to tell me who is a professional who can, midaki means make kosher, who can make my wine press kosher that he bought from a non-Jew. So basically ask the person, he bought a pot, can I use the pot? So generally you can't, you have to do koshering. So with the wine press, how do you kosher a wine press? So because it was lined with pitch, it was lined with tar, the waterproof material, he said to Rabbi Chia, tell me how I can kosher my thing. Amrle, so what Rabbi Chia said to Rav, Rabbi Chia said to his student Rav, look, you go do the job, right? Zil behadeh, you go do the job. V'chazi, now I want you to pay close attention lo mitzavchata alai bei midrasha, that people in the bei midrash won't complain about what I did. Meaning, there's a couple ways to understand this, but Rashi understands that people won't come to the Beit Midrash and say, I did a bad job, meaning I'm putting my stamp on top of this thing. And I don't want people to come and say, oh, you gave your kashrus for this, but nobody's going to buy wine that came from this press because they claim it's still a non-Jewish press. And therefore, we can't sell the wine. So I want you to go, Rav, I want you to do a good job so that everybody will approve of what's happening. So he sends Rav to do this. Where am I? Azal. So now Rav went and Rav went and he saw that there was Shia means smooth. It was very, very smooth, meaning that there was a perfect seal from the waterproofing, so no wine had been absorbed. Amar, he said, oh, so this is great. So that you don't have to assume that any of the yain nesach of the non-Jew got into the vat. Havadi b'nigov sakila. You do this process of nigov where you wash it out and you dry it and you clean it and all of that, and that's it. And then things kosher. And I'll give my stamp, okay to use for a kosher thing. But Hadi de Azavati, as he was going back and forth, meaning he was probably cleaning it out or he was looking about it, Chaza pila mitute. He saw, in fact, actually, that there was a pila, there was a little crack in one part in the pitch, in the waterproofing. The chaza the havi mali chamra, and there was wine actually inside that crack. So that there basically was a crack in the lining, and wine had seeped into that crack and was still there. And we said, oh my gosh, this is terrible because there's wine basically in the layers between the nigov, between the pitch, sorry, and the press. This actually nigov is not good enough. I have to actually peel it off. And this is what he said. My chavivi usually referred to my uncle, meaning his uncle was Rav Chia. Remember, Rav was Rav Chia's nephew. Make sure they don't scream at me. He wanted me to do a good job. I almost made a mistake. I almost lost this because I almost said it was kosher when in fact it wasn't kosher. Tanur Abanan continues the Braita. We are now Where are we? Around halfway down. Tanur Abanan. Hagat. Let's say a person has a gat. Remember, gat is a wine press, or a machatz, or a mashpech shel ovdei kochavim. Give me 1 second. I'm going to actually move so we can be a little quieter. Give me 1 second. Okay, hopefully everyone can still hear me. So says the Braita, Tanur Abanan, Hagat, let's say a person has a wine press and a machatz and a mashpech are the different utensils that they would use basically in the wine press. The translation are one is the thing that you would pour out the ladle, you take out the wine with. The mashpech is the one you would pour it like a funnel through. If you find these things that are basically used for non-Jews, you have to assume they were used for yain nesach. Rebbe matir beniguv. Rebbe says it's enough to do the process of niguv. Remember, niguv is a process of cleaning it out, where you would do a couple steps of cleaning it. It wasn't just wiping it off with a dry towel, but it was a couple steps of cleaning it, and that is enough to to kasher the thing. Chachamim osrim. The Chachamim say that's not enough. It's asr. Umoda Rebbe. Now Rebbe admits bekankanim shel avdei kochavim she'masurim, that the actual barrels that belong to an Avodah Zarah, where they would store it, Rashi understands maybe that the kankanim is they would store it for a very long period of time. Sorry, not Rashi. That others understand that they would store it for a very long period of time, and so therefore they would be asur because it's not enough to wash it out. Rashi here does say that what you're allowed to do then is the thing that we mentioned earlier, where you can fill them up with water for 3 days and take them out every 24 hours. So there is a way to kasher them, but it requires a more intense process. Okay. And Rashi here implies that the reason the kankanim are a bigger problem is because they're made out of cheres. They're made out of earthenware and not made out of stone or out of metal of some sort, or not lined, and therefore they absorb more. Now, what's the difference between why is kankanim one? Sorry, this is what I thought Rashi, the Gemara says. What's the difference between one and the other? Because zeh machniso b'kiyum or likiyum, zeh ein machniso b'kiyum, because one you put in for a long period and one you don't put in for a long period. So the vat and the ladles and the pit and the funnel are used temporarily, but the containers are used for long-term storage. Things get absorbed more, and therefore you have to do a bigger job in cleaning it. Now continues the Braita, shel eitz v'shel even, if they're made out of not cheres, but they're made out of wood or stone, then it's much easier, yinagev. Then you can just, again, clean them. You don't have to keep them for 3 days. You just clean them out and wash them and dry them. But if they are lined with this tar, then asurim, then it's not enough to just clean them out. Now that's the Braita. Says Gemara, what are you talking about? Hatzna, but our Mishnah said, Gat shel even shezafta of kochavim minagvavi Torah. Right? Our Mishnah said that you can, if you have a gat that is made out of stone. This is our Mishnah, right? That we just had above. Where am I? The gat shel even shezafta of kochavim minagvavi Torah. So our Mishnah just said it's mutar. So how could you say in the Braita that it's asur? Our Mishnah said it's mutar. This is where matit and rachba. The difference is whether they've used it already. In our Mishnah, it's unused. And since it's unused, there wasn't a chance for yain nesach to get into it. And even if they use yain nesach in the process of putting together the tar that they lined it with, they didn't use it for crushing grapes. So you can just wash it out and dry it out and you'll be okay. But Braita did the rachba. But the Braita is where they used it, and because they used it, it becomes more puzzle, or because it's more dug into the thing. Now let's go back and quote this Braita that we had before. This Braita we had before. The Braita said Hagat, right, which is the wine press. Hamachatz, hamashpech, the pourer, the ladle, and the funnel. Shel ovdei kochavim. Rabbi matir beniguv. The chachamim osrim. Says the Gemara, but I remember I said we're referring to cheres in that case, but we learned in our Mishnah, Nantan, in our Mishnah, shel cheres, if the gat is made out of cheres, is made out of earthenware, even if you peel off the tar, harezu asura. So, but how could Rebbe say? How could the Chachamim say? Sorry, that How could Rabbi say that it's mutar? Says Rava, that's the answer. Seifa de matnitanat on the Rabbanan. Our Mishnah is going according to the Rabbanan, who say that if it's made out of cheres, it's always asur with niguv. But Rabbi disagrees. So Rabbi would disagree with our Mishnah. Now, Darash Rava, Rava taught in the Beit Midrash that na'ava articho. If you na'ava, which is a funny word, right? Na'ava meaning you have a gat. Rashi says that it refers to na'ava. You take your gat, your container, your press of wine, and it was used by a non-Jew. Then you can be articho. Articho means basically you light it on fire, meaning burn it up. So do we do when we kasher kalim, use burning hot water. You pour burning hot water into it, kli rishon, and that's enough to make it kosher. Now, Rava, when Rava would send, so Rava did a big business, let's say in wine, and part of course, the business of wine is not just selling wine; it's working with barrels, right? So they would need Rava, I guess, had a barrel or worked with people who made barrels, and they would send them to Harpanya where they made the beer or the wine to fill them up, right? So he supplied the barrels. The problem was he was worried that in the transport, they were going to use them for other things, right? You give your 100 barrels to a guy and say, I'll pay you to transport them to, in this case, Harpanya. He says, great, they're empty barrels. I'll fill them up with my wine. I'll bring wine to Harpanya. I'll empty them out, sell the wine in Harpanya, and then give the empty barrels to the purchaser, right? Which people probably do all the time. You rent a truck, they do whatever they want on the way. So Rava was worried that they would use his barrels for Yain Nesach. So Sachav lahu apumayu. So he would turn them upside down. These are like containers. V'chatam le and he would put a seal, right, a chatima on the bitzrayu, on the rim of it, so that so basically it would show don't use this, and if you do use it, I'm going to see that you used it. And he thought, why was Rebbe worried? Why was Rava worried about that? Let them use it. It's a barrel. You'll just wash it out. Because Rava felt if you put something in there for long-term use, even if you're only going to use it for a week or a day, right? Because you can't keep these barrels. But basically, when you put wine to them for storage, then Gazru Be Rabbanan. Rabbanan made a gzera, and therefore it would not be enough to wash them out, and therefore it's not kosher. Okay. Now, I'm trying to think if I should continue. I'm not going to continue. I know it's a short daf, but I'm going to stop here. The next words in the Gemara are b'mayim nagvan, this sort of enigmatic thing we've talked about a few times of washing things out. The Gemara is going to go 4 lines from the bottom of daf ayin daled on bet and talk about how you do this process. And the reason I'm not continuing is not to cheat you or anything, but because it goes on for some time onto daf ayin hey amid aleph, the whole question of niguv. And so for the last 2 daf of Avodah Zarah, I will pause that and let everyone continue on Monday with Daf Ayin Hey. So thank you very much, everyone. Shavua Tov, and we'll continue.